we are animals. We crave the ability to be we. I know it's called me undies. We undies might have sounded differently, right?
Is it a disco now?
Yeah, it's the after party, so it's now we go with the flash.
My goal in life is to be a laptop sticker.
Me too.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.
It's a great honor, Mr. Jaffe. It's always nice to be with you.
I'm so happy to be with you. I'm honored.
Thanks for doing this, too. It's a real service to the community.
Thank you for doing this, Joseph, for doing CoronaTV in general. And it's your gift to the universe, and it's appreciated.
Very human, and I like that.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're insane!
Well, hello everybody from the beautiful, magnificent Tivoli Garden in Copenhagen, Denmark. This is apparently not the place that I met my guest. It's not the place where Martin and I met, and he explained to me when we were chatting in the green room where we met, and it all came back to me, not dissimilar to yesterday's conversation with John Lawson and how we met and a connection with Van Jones. But maybe we'll talk about that when I bring him onto the show. He is prolific. He's a prolific author. He's a prolific speaker. He's a prolific thought leader. And, you know, it's amazing because he's only 14 years old. Look at those boyish looks and those boyish charm that he has. So I'm super excited. I wish you could see what you see. He's one step ahead of me. He's got signs that he's putting up in front of my face. He just put up one with a heart that said love it. I hope he doesn't have one that says hate it, but he is writing prolifically right now. This could be his next book. So he's distracting me. That's not fair. But now I don't have a choice. So I'm going to have to look at him, look at you, look at me, etc. And we're going to have a lot of fun, but also he is going to give advice, and the insights are going to be flowing freely. You can absolutely bet that. But before we get back to him, I'm super excited about next week's interviews. Let me give you a little bit more of that screen today. We've got Lane Green, who is at The Economist. He is on Monday. Charlene Lee on Tuesday, Donovan Andrews Wednesday, Christopher S. Penn on Thursday, and Brian Kramer on Friday. A great mix of individuals, thought leaders, business leaders, movers, shakers. It's going to be awesome. So are you. You are awesome. And I just want to, once again, just to end the week, thank you so much for your engagement, for the quality and the community that we are building together. I appreciate it. Well, today is National Clerihew. Am I even pronouncing it correctly? It's National Clerihew Day, July 10th, 2020. And what is a clerihew? A clerihew is, there are certain rules in terms of what a clerihew is. It's a 4-line, it's almost like a haiku or a limerick. It's a 4-line poem that always begins with a person's name and goes A-A-B-B. So I actually created a clerihew for you, actually for Martin. And this is how it goes. Martin Lindstrom, a ticking time bomb for companies dense that lack common sense. So that is, he just put in an OMG. So that is Martin's clerihew, and I think I observed all the rules. So happy birthday to my Facebook friends. Not too many of you today, but I do want to just say happy birthday to you, whether you are still at home, stuck at home, or whether you're, you know, just need a bit of a positive vibe. And likewise, of course, to all my LinkedIn friends out there, happy birthday to you. I don't typically spend too much time talking about myself on the show, but I did find out yesterday that Built to Suck won another award. This is the National Indie Excellence Awards. And I want to also congratulate Rohit Bhargava, my publisher, Idea Press. I think he was awarded 15 different times, or so many of his authors. But it just, means a lot to me. And when the book is acknowledged in any way, shape, or form, and so I just wanted to share the news with you. Well, today's seated soliloquy is something that is very much connected to my guest who wrote biology. I decided to call this one cellology, and Martin was asking me earlier if I've been sued based on the cover of Bull to Suck. Hopefully he won't be suing me for talking and riffing a little bit about cellology. Well, as you may know, Martin wrote a book called Biology, in which he analyzes what makes people buy. He identifies the factors that influence buyers' decisions in a world cluttered with messages such as ads, slogans, jingles, celebrity endorsements, and I suppose influencer marketing too. Lindstrom, through a study of the human psyche, explains the subconscious mind and its role in deciding what the buyer will buy. Finally, he debunks some myths about advertising and promotion. So I thought I would use my soliloquy today to talk about what makes companies sell, and specifically now in the age of COVID. We're all familiar with the question, do you make what you sell, or do you sell what you make? This has been used for decades to draw a distinction between the industrial mass merchandising sales approach versus a more marketing-oriented, customer-centric and insights-driven method. But now I wonder if we should be asking the question, why do we sell this at all? Do people need it? Do they need it now? And if so, what levers should we adjust in terms of how we go to market, how we sell, and what those terms and conditions look like in the contract of expectations and the consideration of value? For example, should we adjust pricing? We do this during the great Memorial Day sale, after all. What about payment terms? Do we relax those? Do we lower or obliterate interest rates? Do we make these permanent? Do we offer forgiveness on late payments? And then, of course, there's customer service. Not less, but more. A whole lot more. And where the bridge between biology and cellology meets, should we do a complete introspective and a rethink on the entire relationship with a view towards creating and curating a bold new standard that over-delivers the stuff that counts, like humanity, and minimizes the stuff that doesn't, like PE ratios? Well, something to think about. And now the perfect person, not only to think about these things, but to share what he thinks, Martin Lindstrom. But before I bring him on, I'm going to show you this.
I've always been curious about the world around me, inspired by the details of life that most people overlook. If you really want to develop a powerful brand, you have to feel the heartbeat of the consumer. You have to see things from their eyes. I do that through travel, 300 days out of the year, upwards of 70 countries, talking, shopping, eating, and living with consumers. What I'm searching for is the kind of emotional gap that might lead to a brand opportunity or product innovation big enough to impact an entire generation. Life becomes multi-dimensional and more meaningful when you can see things from every direction. The more you observe, the more you know, the more fulfilled you are. This is what branding is all about.
He makes you second guess the things that are the obvious. And he always turns our heads to a place where everyone isn't looking.
He's been very much a fertile mind in the field of consumer behavior.
The most powerful product innovations share only one principle. They combine two ordinary things in a completely new way. Every company requires a different strategy and a different approach. And every year I spend millions of dollars forecasting the trends of brands so that my clients are future-proof.
Martin is remarkably intuitive, and that one of the things I appreciate about Martin's work is his understanding that what he did and what he said in 2000 and what he's doing and saying in 2015 is different. And those are a reflection of his processing of what is the evolution of us as a species.
Human desire is a puzzle, and my job is to put together the pieces in a way that creates an entirely new and undiscovered picture. This is how to create a groundbreaking brand. This is what I do.
How about that? Martin Lindstrom is the founder and chairman of Lindstrom Company, the world's leading brand and culture transformation group, operating across 5 continents and more than 30 countries. Time magazine has named Lindstrom one of the world's 100 most influential people. And for 5 years running, Thinkers 50, the world's premier ranking resource of business icons, has selected Lindstrom to be among the world's top 50 business thinker. Lindstrom is a high-profile speaker and author of 7 New York Times best-selling books, translated into 60 languages. His book, Brand Sense, was critically acclaimed by the Wall Street Journal as one of the 5 best books ever published, best marketing books ever published. Small Data was praised as revolutionary, and Time magazine wrote this about biology, a breakthrough in branding. I mean, those are incredible credentials, but when you meet him right now, you'll see he's just a really incredible human being. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And listen, I think you said so much stuff about me now, so I'm completely blushing. So if I'm red in the face, you know why, right? Good to see you, Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so much and it's so impressive. And then, you know, as I was watching it, I loved the video because it was very aspirational. It was, you know, I just, and also maybe it made me feel that sense of sadness, which is, none of us are traveling at the moment. I want to go back to Venice.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, we should change the narrative to say something like, I now sit in front of Zoom 300 days a year instead of just thinking, yeah, it's crazy, right?
Exactly. Martin Lindstrom is a Zoomer. He spends, you're not one of the Zoomers that actually took down President Trump on TikTok. You're a Zoomer because that's what you do 365 days. But you know, in all seriousness, I mean, talk about a man who, you know, lived a life, 300 days of traveling, and now, you know, this is something that I saw on your site as well. You've had to pivot yourself, you've had to change, and now, you know, you're not just saying you're Zooming, you are Zooming. Tell us a little bit about the shift for you and how comfortable and how seamless it's been.
It is such a good question, and I'll tell you one thing. One of the things we do in our company is to go out and provoke organizations to change. And I've done that for nearly 30 years now, can you believe it? And I've always been so frustrated about companies not getting the message. Why can't you just change, right? And so we built up all sorts of methodologies to persuade companies to do it, and it kind of succeeded. And then finally one day, you know, it stops at me. Do I really have to change now? And so what happened when COVID arrived? I actually went for a wedding in Sydney in Australia. Can you believe it? And that was the 9th of March. And then all the borders closed the 10th of March, and I could not get out of Australia for 2.5 months. So I sat there thinking, what the heck do I do now? So what I did was I said to myself, I want to write a letter to myself 5 years from now on, which is basically saying, Martin, I'm so proud of you because you managed to take a disaster and turn it into something positive and make yourself change in 3 ways. So I wrote this letter, and the first thing it said was, utilize your existing asset and turn it around in a completely new way. So that's the first thing I did. So as you alerted to in your build-up, I wrote this book called Biology, and I said, well, why don't I rewrite biology and give it away free of charge to everyone? So what I did was I started to observe people, which is really my job anyway, and started to pick up these seemingly insignificant observations from our human behavior as COVID-19 was flooding the world, and saw some really fascinating things. And out of that, this book basically downloaded 1 million times, which is kind of crazy because none of my books have downloaded that much before to that extent. So that was the first thing I did. The second thing I really did was to say, hey, why don't I start to convert all of our e-learning projects, all our real learning into e-learning projects. So we're working with a software developing company now, and we're creating whole new sets of software, which is workshop software where we can do real brainstormings with our clients. And we just did a trial run the other day where they had 120 people across 40 countries from one of our clients brainstorming across the world. And it was not one of these nightmare Microsoft Teams experiences. Actually, it was amazing because ideas coming out of this worked. And it really turned me away from being a skeptical to a positive about what you can do online. And the third thing I did was to do consumer insights through the screen. So we did that in Saudi Arabia, we did that in Oman, we did that in Japan. We've done that in more than 40 countries over the last month alone, learning about consumers' behavior through the screen. So I feel when I'm writing my letter to myself 5 years from now, at least I tried to change. Was I good at it? Not necessarily, but I tried, and it was so fun, I have to tell you.
So there, and we're going to come back to the Corona version of biology, or the edition, in a moment. But there were a few things you said there that just really, like, well, first of all, you got stuck in Australia for 2. You couldn't leave as someone who doesn't. They wouldn't let you go home.
No, because there's no planes leaving. So unless I wanted to swim, all planes stopped,
And you had no idea the day before it was coming? It was just
I did
like
not.
that?
I was drunk and silly one day, and the other day I became incredibly sober, and it was not from drinking Corona beer. So, it was crazy. Yeah, it was. It was really a crazy experience because I'm not lying when I'm saying I was, until January, traveling 300 days a year, visiting on average about 60 to 70 countries every year. So it's a huge number. I mean, extraordinary high number. And so I was addicted to traveling. And of course, the world really became my office. And from one day to another, I was stuck there. And actually, from a psychology point of view, it was very fascinating because I looked at myself from outside, looking at my behavior. And then I had these pains going on from the inside saying, ugh, what the heck is going on here, right? Because I really felt everything was disappearing under myself. That whole, lifeblood of me visiting people in odd situations around the world was gone for a second. And I think mostly the fear of never getting back to it again was really very prominent for me. Did I go into depression? Not at all. Because I constantly see the opportunity and choose to see the glass half full rather than half empty. But it was not necessarily just a walk in the park. It was a bit challenging, and I learned so much from it, I have to tell you.
So you said you learned a lot from it, but it's the thing that's so interesting is I don't think people would expect someone like you to have these pains and encounter the challenges. There's that old saying, right? Change happens when the pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing. So talk about maybe something that what you've learned about yourself throughout this process, because I think theoretically you maybe got it before, you lectured on it, you spoke about it, and then when you had to go through it, what was different to what you expected?
It's a very good question. I think what was different was that what I learned was it's the fear of the unknown which are making us resist changing. And the fear of the unknown, as ridiculous as it may be, overshadows any common sense and any logic and becomes a very dark cloud, or at least a very negative cloud, which somehow is dictating you to have a constant awareness of what is going to happen now and challenge yourself, because I am, like anyone else, also insecure. And I think through this process, I sort of started to question my core skills, not in terms of giving advice or helping companies, but more saying, hey, am I doing the right thing right now? Is this really a calling for me to say, hey, Martin, you're on the wrong track. You better change your track. Is there some stop signs I'm not seeing right now? Was there a warning sign I had to see somewhere? What are the signs? Do I pick up the opportunities I had to pick up now? Or is the entire world just skating by you and you're sort of sitting alone on your own little island later on? These were probably subconsciously some of the questions I asked myself. And I think out of that, I somehow had a pretty amazing time, because I suddenly somehow realized the pain and the suffering employees and companies are going through when I help transform them, and where they're saying to me, love it, but they never do it. And I felt that love it, never do it feeling with myself, being sort of drawn back and saying, I want to do it, but I can't. So that was kind of the struggle I went through. So let me put it this way. The difference was I was intellectually processing things before. Now I felt it, so I had a sense of empathy for it. And that means I can talk about it today, hopefully in a much more convincing way, right?
You know, the word that I jotted down as you were talking and then you said it was empathy. And I think whether it was your own introspective or also just perspective, these are not things that we would ever encounter as people who keynote or who create frameworks and help people change. But when you're on the other side, you feel that, and I think that can only have made you so much richer for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just tell you a story, which is taking you completely off track in the beginning, but I'll promise you I'll come back to the track again, Joseph. But so one of our clients is a pharma client, and they are one of the largest manufacturer of respiratory disease and asthma products in the world. Great people, been around for more than 100 years. It's a family-owned company. And I asked the senior management of this company some time ago, hey, how well do you understand your patients? And they said, a lot. We worked with them for 100 years. Of course, we understand them. And then I went out to consumer homes and I had them with me. And there was one beautiful young consumer saying to me, listen, when I have asthma, I feel like a loser. I feel like I'm excluded from my tribe. I feel alone. So what I've done is I have a technique to create empathy among other people. I give them a straw and I ask them to breathe through this straw, and then they can feel how it is to have asthma. So I stole that idea. I took it back to senior management. I had the whole management put the straw in the mouth, shut down the light, played a sound bite of a person with really big difficulties breathing. And then I had people breathing through the straw. And after 30 seconds, half of the room spit out these straws. And I said to them after the session, about a minute later, I said, how did you feel? They said, it was horrible. We couldn't breathe. I said, that's how your patients feel 24/7, the entire life. And at that stage, they said to me, listen, we never had that idea, and we actually have to see the world completely different. That is in many ways what I've tried, and that's what I've learned from empathy. And remember, the empathy is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person and not just see the world from that person's point of view, but also feel it. And what I've learned is, and this is a very, very important lesson for you and everyone out there, it took me 20 years to learn, that you can show any report in the world. I can show any neuroscans in the world. I've done so much neuroscience work. I can show any evidence on paper or graphs or charts or anything, but it has zero impact compared to you showing a person or feeling a person crying next to you. and that is empathy. And I think what has happened through the coronavirus world we are in right now is that sadly we have a screen between ourselves and the rest of the world. And quite often I feel like I'm observing the world but never really participate in it. And I don't feel that emotional empathy which we sometimes had when you and I were standing on stage. But I also do think in companies is a huge problem, because now we have all employees stuck in all their small home offices, and they're even more disconnected from the consumer, right? And we already are bad, but it's even worse. And that's what one of your books are talking about, right? So the issue here is that empathy is gone from corporate America. And the issue is we don't take it serious. But I can tell you the big next trend, and I guarantee you this, is going to be how we understand empathy and build it in, because we completely lost it. And just a last comment on this, I'm sorry for my long-winded answers, but a last comment is, did you know that human mankind in the species, and the reason why we are so powerful we are today, is because the third layer in our brain, so we have the reptile brain first, the reptile brain had zero empathy. But the reason why we have empathy today is the third layer. And that third layer is our ability to predict what an elephant would do when we were hunted back in the jungle or whatever. It's the reason why we are adapting much quicker than any other species, like a polar bear still drowning after 10 generations in Iceland, that type of thing. And the reason why is because we have that sense of empathy. And for the first time ever in our studies, we can see that we now, as human mankind, are losing that ability. And that is frightening, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, we see it. Bob says, embrace empathy. That is a good hashtag to trend. I mean, we're seeing it across the board, right, Martin? We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it we're seeing it we're even seeing it in the whole kind of malaise of corporate speak, which is we're all in this together. It's something that I've covered with so many guests on the show, from the challenge for these companies is they believe that they have empathy until they realize that every other company is saying the same script, and it's rote, and you don't have the ability to feel and feel that pain. I've spoken about many superpowers that have emerged from this. Endurance, patience, generosity is a new superpower, paying it forward. But I absolutely agree with you. Empathy is the new superpower, or at least needs to be. But maybe to your point, it's become more like kryptonite.
It has, absolutely. And I think here's the issue. Empathy has been branded the wrong way, because I think people are thinking about, sorry for saying this, crying women and cupcakes. And that's really not the issue. The issue is that empathy is really our ability to read other people. And think about this. When you operate in companies, there is zero empathy for multiple reasons. First of all, we're communicating through emails. Okay, so how do you communicate empathy there? You really can't, unless you put a lot of smileys in them, and people really don't do that today. And second, we have silos, and each of these silos quite often have KPIs attached to them, and they're different set of KPIs across different silos. That means we have zero interest in working together. Now, I spoke to an acquaintance of mine, Alan Mully, which was the former CEO of Boeing and of Ford, and he said that, listen, the way he ran and turned around both of these organizations, and if you're familiar with him, he was voted the #1 CEO in the United States, I think almost 10 years in a row. But this guy, he said, I'm giving people the bonus based on their ability to work with others, to create teamworks in organizations. Now, very few organizations today do that. They are more focused on you creating your own little success story and then elevating yourself through the system. Well, that's not creating empathy, because I have zero interest in helping others so we combined can work together and grow. Now, this is in sharp contrast to the millennials, right? Which wants to work together in partnership and grow together. So we have two really distinct, sharp differences here. And I think that's the clash we're also experiencing right now. The millennials simply don't want to work in these crappy corporations, because they just feel that they're wasting their time. And we oldies working in those organizations don't understand why they're behaving that odd way and don't want to work there. But this is the transformation we see, most likely towards empathy becoming much more prominent in the corporate world.
Seth says marketers have a tendency to take the tool of personas, which are great for manufacturing empathy across teams, and turn them into ad buying stat sheets. I think it's almost this idea of, given 9 times out of 10, the corporation will take, I'll give you the analogy I use, and I actually produced a little image. I'll send it to you afterwards. I said, if given the option, marketers would take the goose that laid the golden egg and cook it on the barbecue.
Absolutely, they will. And if there's no goose left, then they'll take the whole cage it was sticked into and boil that too, right? I mean, I love your quote, but that's true. But I also have to say one thing. That's the reason why the concept of marketing is dying. Because it's become an algorithm play instead. And I think the sexiness the advertising industry once had, and what I certainly was attracted by when I was 12 and began my own advertising agency back then, many, many years ago, was that sexiness, which is completely squeezed out of it and has become incredibly rational, that whole space. We are definitely seeing a transformation happening right now. And the key driver of that is that ethics have to play in this. I wrote a book called Brand Washed, and the book was all about this topic, and it introduced the idea of ethics in advertising and communication and marketing. And a lot of my clients actually criticized me big way for it, because they felt I was far too, I don't know, on the consumer side here. So the book actually didn't sell very well, because companies didn't want to buy it, because they felt there was no need for them to play ethics. Later on, it showed that probably that direction is the direction we have to go, which I'm really happy about, except that no one has bought it except my mom and dad. But the idea is very simple, that ethics have to become part of this for 2 reasons. The first is that the true communication is not an ad on television anymore. It's word of mouth. And word of mouth quite often is most sincere when people love what you're doing and they continue staying loving to what you do. And the second reason is that employees have to work in the companies too, and they have to feel good. Now, let me be frank. If I worked for Kraft Heinz, I would hate it. I would hate it, because they're putting chemicals into their packs with pure colors and whatever it is. It does not match with what the market wants. A lot of the CPGs are in that space right now, where they basically do not listen to the consumer. And they don't do that because the machinery has built it up in such a way that they're not motivated to do that, because they're so afraid of changing, because that will question everything they're doing. And I think that will simply not survive in the future. So we are seeing a shift, and I love every minute of it, because it's so well needed, right?
Yeah, it's almost like don't shoot the messenger. We're just basically reflecting on it and saying it is what it is. And
I'm not sure I agree. I actually think you should shoot the messenger, and I think I am the messenger. I don't know if you are, but I certainly am a messenger, but I'm also the one you should shoot, because I do think that you cannot cover yourself under the marketing hat and say, well, sorry, nothing to do with me, it's those people over there. I think the clever marketeers out there are changing their roles, and they become the driver in the organization of combining all the departments and reinventing products and services and interaction with consumers and all this stuff. I see them as being the conductors in organizations, because no one is doing it, both to run the culture inside, but also to create products which are true to what consumers want and communicate it. They cannot just paint veneer. And so, yes, shoot the messengers, because we've not been good enough.
I mean, that's a very powerful. Immediately, as you said that, I thought differently, and I thought to myself that, it's not good enough for people like us to stand on stage and get paid and leave. We almost have that responsibility, or at least the ability to say, hey, listen, it's hard to be you. It sucks to be you. You got to go back to 400 unread emails. You got to go back to that boss that you couldn't get to come to this conference. Absolutely. Because they were too busy. And look, it's hard though, because they still, what is the saying? There are none as deaf as those who choose not to hear.
Exactly. And I think that's a point. And I think that's back to your question about what did I learn during the lockdown of COVID-19. And one of the things I did learn was the pain which those people receiving 400 emails a day feels when they're sitting in a gridlock situation. I mean, one of our major clients is a bank, and I asked 1,000 executives in a room in New York a couple of years ago, how happy are you working in the financial industry? And I would claim that 95% raised their hand and say, we hate it. Imagine going to work every day and hating what you're doing and saying banking is not what it once was. Imagine that. And I think for you to talk on a stage, for me to talk on a stage, I think it adds so much more credibility if we felt the pain ourselves. And that certainly, I think that's both what you and I have done. I know you went through a somewhat similar transformation. But I think once you do that, you are also putting the skin in the game. And certainly from my point of view, a lot of the work we have done over the years is not just to help companies turn them around and create powerful brands. We're also doing an enormous amount of charity, helping sustainability around the world or whatever. And we're doing it because I feel, put your skin in the game. Because once you do it, you also feel what the pushbacks are in the organization, and therefore you can play that game much better later on, but you're also doing something good at the same time. Easy to say, I know.
Right.
But at least let's give it a go, right, somehow.
Carla said, since her family is Danish, I didn't know that actually. She couldn't resist tuning in to hear Martin. Yes, Martin is Danish, as is my brother-in-law, as is, Tivoli Garden in the background. And by the way, I did this for you too, because you did it for me. So that's my little emoticon for you, Martin.
That is. Thank you, Carla. If you speak Danish, we can speak later on in the secret green room when we're going offline. Right, I'm waiting for you.
I'm sure she'll come to the Zoom after show, which is a good incentive. Martin, I clearly could talk to you forever, and I'm glad this. One of the upsides of this pandemic has been the ability for me to reconnect with old friends and with people that I respect so much. There are three things I want to still cover with you today. The first is you used the phrase future-proof earlier. And as you can see, I have a collection of your books. And I was thinking to myself and wondering, is it actually possible to ever future-proof a brand? Can a brand ever be future-proofed? And I'll leave it at that to start.
I actually think so. Now, funny enough, you're taking the most crappy books of all of my books here. But if you take Brand Sense was
I have them all. I've got lots of them for you.
Yeah, but if you take Brand Sense, I'll pick Brand Sense for a second. That book I wrote back in the day because I fundamentally believe that when you sit behind a screen, you only appeal to the sense of sight and sound. But really, the reality is that there is three other senses. And I fundamentally believe that powerful brands should basically appeal to 5 tracks at the same time. So what we did was we did this neuroscience study. We scanned a lot of people's brains. And one of the things I learned was really interesting. Our brain works like an old-fashioned tape recorder. And if you imagine you have 5 tracks recording the message at the same time, well, then I don't need to tell you, then you record it 5 times and you actually may remember it more than if it's only recorded on 1 track. And that's exactly what we learned. We learned that the more track I record a sense on, the more I remember it, the more I call it, and the stronger engagement I have. It was the first time ever in history that was proven through neuroscience. Now, I don't need to tell you that message is still relevant today, even though I wrote the book in 2003. So that's 17 years ago. So I fundamentally believe you can be future-proof if you go down to the lowest level of the Maslow's pyramid of needs, and you basically say, what are the fundamental drivers which are driving human beings? And if you constantly reconnect with that, then I'm pretty sure you'll get there. I'll take another book which is not up there, which is called Brand Child. In Brand Child, I basically predicted that in the future, the generations will be more appealed by being famous than earning money. And I also predicted that in the future, there will be a color brochure developed online where young people will display and promote themselves. And if that color brochure is taken off, they will have no existence in their mind. And 2 years later, Facebook was invented. I think still that's relevant, what I'm saying. It's just another channel basically fulfilling that basic need we talk about. So you can be future-proof, and I think companies can be that too, as long as they don't fall in love with the products they produce, but they fall in love with the basic need, the human need they have to fulfill. And there's a huge difference between those two.
Yeah, I think that's a great response in terms of getting back to fundamentals. I also put them up not by in order of crappiness or lack thereof, but because brand sense, I think, is when I met you or when I connected with you, and also clicks, bricks, and brands. I believe from just going through your bibliography, might have been your first or one of your first.
No, it actually wasn't. It was called Brand Building on the Internet, and I wrote that in 1994, was the year the internet or the World Wide Web was invented.
And this was 2001. Wow! So
yeah, it was
further back.
Yeah, and actually, I'll tell you a fun story about clicks, bricks, and brands. Actually, originally, I invented a term called clicks and mortar. And then Charles Schwab sued me because they published a book 5 minutes before me, and I had the title already, so we had to destroy all the books and call it this horrible title. But really, it was the idea of taking offline and online and combine it, which really is what we see today. And brand building on the internet is very interesting with that book because I read it the other day. And so remember, that's then published quite some time ago in 94. But it's still kind of relevant because it goes through the 10 behaviors of human beings as they go online, and were the first book to define how brands online would look like, because brands online did not exist in 1994. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was introduced to the net, mid-94, there was a guy saying to me, hey, do you want to see this thing? I said, what is it? It's something called the internet. Okay, cool. So I surfed the entire internet over the night, and those 262 pages. I surfed every page on the internet,
wow,
which I'm pretty proud of, right? So that shows you how much this world has changed since then, right? Crazy.
I was thinking, there's that old saying, which is 600 channels and still nothing to watch. So now we have like 17 trillion pages, and no, I'm kidding. That's amazing, and it's just it's kind of, it blows me away. 262.
Yeah. I remember I flicked through every.
What was your favorite page? Do you remember your favorite?
I do actually remember the favorite page. Yeah,
and TiffanyGardens.com.
No way. But I think what was interesting about it was I said to the guy introducing me to the net, I said to him, okay, I've done the internet now. What's happening then?
Right, which is now, and now we've seen that, which is these Facebook posts that say, I finished Netflix. Now what?
That's what I do with the internet. It's kind of crazy. So and through that, of course I learned a lot because we were the pioneers taking Lego online, for example, back in the day. Can I tell you a deeply frustrating and really controversial story about Lego? Is that okay?
Yes, in fact, we'll get to biology, and we'll get to the Ministry of Common Sense. There'll be time. I want to hear a deeply frustrating story about Lego. In fact, I'll give you the full screen.
So fantastic. Well, listen, here's the story. So I came up with this crazy idea. I think it was in 94. Lego were just about to go online, and Lego did not know about this as well, of course. So whenever you would email Lego, you would get a notice back saying no, blindalley@lego.com, because they didn't want to communicate with the consumers. They hated this stuff. Anyway, I came up with this crazy idea. I wanted to create a Lego Advent calendar, and some of you guys may not be familiar with it. Perhaps those of you from Europe are, for sure. It's 24 small lids or doors you're opening, and then in some cases you can have chocolates underneath, behind. In other cases, just a little cartoon or something. So I said to the folks at Lego, hey, why don't we create a Lego Advent calendar? And they thought, wow, that's a great idea. So we worked on it. We programmed it in CGI programming back then, I remember. And this amazing Lego Advent calendar was up and running the 1st of December, right? And then we sent an email to, I don't know how we got hold of all these people, but we got hold of a lot of email addresses from Lego. We sent out this email address saying, Lego is up and running with its Christmas Advent calendar. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of the Lego fans around the world. And I'll never forget it, because I came to work that morning, the 1st of December, and I had, from my recollection, perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 emails in my inbox. And I thought, oh my God, this is really successful. And it was complaints. It was complaints from people in Middle East, Jewish people, all sorts of other religions, saying, how dare you Lego having a religious stand on this stuff? How can you push Christianity? And I just want to put in a disclosure here. I'm born and raised in Denmark, and 99.9% of the country is Protestant. So I came from this little bubble back before I moved around the world, right? So I basically just saw it, the most black and white mood you could see. It really was black and white. And so I went into panic. I never had 4,000 complaints before. So I hired this team of students helping me day 2 to write personalized messages to all these Lego fans, because I took them very serious. I'm one of the Lego fans as well. So we wrote, dear whatever it is, so sorry about it, saw your messages. I mean, this was serious. I remember this Jewish family sending a lot of photos of how they, through 2 generations, that played with Legos. And the end message was saying, we will never ever touch that toy again. So I had to write all these personal messages apologizing, didn't think about it. And then in the end, I was lazy. So I put in a standard signature line, and the standard signature line was saying, and have a Merry Christmas.
Oh my God.
And I have to say, I'm laughing and crying about this story because I learned so much from it, because of course I was the one completely wrong here. But I also want to say it introduced me to diversity and to that whole thing in '94 when I was still 24 years of age. And I think that just gives you a sense of how much the net has changed since and what has happened in our world, right?
I mean, I'm just shocked because I figured you were still 22 years old. So,
You make me blush again. Thank you. Keep it coming. The camera lens, which is the problem here, I think, right?
As you were telling that story, I was thinking, please tell me it doesn't end with Merry Christmas. And,
Yeah.
now you've learned Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, but certainly a lesson learned. All right. So I want to just touch on this ebook, which blows me away that you have, it's been downloaded over 1 million times. Yeah. And there's so much to talk about in it. But, I just want to touch on 2 things today. One is you refer to this period as the world's first global 9/11. Yeah. And it's not that I'm not challenging that assertion, because I think you're right. But I wonder whether, I think even within the US, there's been a real struggle, and an inability to unite like we united around 9/11. Maybe the world is feeling it, but I feel like here in the US, there is a little bit of there is a clear disconnect. And I wonder if you could maybe talk to that very briefly. And then I want to just touch on one other point with us, and then we'll talk about your new book.
Absolutely. Well, listen, long story short, if you go back to neuroscience, and when I wrote the base book called Biology, B-U-Y-ology, I connected with a gentleman, a professor, which is Antonio Damascus. And Antonio Damascus invented a term called a somatic marker. It's written S-O-M-A-T-I-C, somatic marker. And somatic marker is something so dramatic you'll never forget it. And Joseph, for sure, I am pretty sure you remember where you were, who you're together with, and even who you called on 9/11. Tell me.
Yeah, I was at the agency right by St. Pat's Cathedral, and immediately in the moment when the second plane hit, and we knew it was a terrorist attack, then I immediately tried to contact my wife, and I was able to get hold of her before cell phones went down, to tell her, do not get in the subway and go to Long Island City. And then we had a nanny who was with our daughter, who was born in May of that year. So she was only 4 months old, and immediately said, Adela, go home with our daughter and wait for us there. So yes. Wow.
Amazing. So obviously it's impacted. Can I just ask you, what did you have for dinner at your last birthday party?
No idea.
And that's the difference between what we call a somatic marker and not. And there is what we call a negative and a positive somatic marker. Now, 9/11 is a negative somatic marker. And if I can go into this in great detail, I don't want to do that. But what I want to say is that corona is a negative somatic marker as well. Because what it does is two things. It first of all, it creates an emotional negative bookmark in our brains, which means that we fundamentally will start to see the world in a different light. And that's a pain I think the whole world has suffered, no matter if people have one opinion or another. The second thing, which is what I call, and this is fascinating stuff, it will take 1 minute, so I'll do it fast, okay? In marketing speak, we have something called entry points. An entry point is really, no, Joseph, if you have a kid, I think you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have
3.
Yeah, so you have 3. So I'm pretty sure that when you got your first kid, then you suddenly saw baby strollers everywhere and everything baby suddenly popped up from nowhere suddenly. And what we call, as you know, more than anyone, what we call that in marketing speak is an entry point. And we have one where I move from home, when I get my first kid, when I retire. These are entry points. And we actually have 7 entry points in our lives. Now, guess what? For the first time in living memory, we have now experienced a universal 8th entry point, which is a universal synchronized 8th entry point where we experience the world in a different and new light, and we actually synchronize ourselves accordingly, and we change our behavior accordingly. And this is what's so fascinating, because in the end of the day, it means it's also opening up the door for a lot of new opportunities, because these behavioral changes are so profound. They go back to the deepest level at Maslow's, that in fact, that will have a fundamental change for how companies should behave and interact in the future.
I have remembered now, and I will never forget where I was when I learned about the phrase somatic marker. You know, Martin, I was thinking to myself, how do I describe you? And even when I put the little blurb together, the little promotional blurb, and I don't like the term futurist. I've never liked it, and I thought to myself, Martin's not a futurist. He's not pontificating about, you know, 25 or 30 years time, and then I kind of realized that you are, I called you a doctor, I called you a corporate doctor, but I think you're the corporate scientist, because you've been able to help us understand why.
Writing it down, corporate scientist, good one.
But not the biologist, right? But not the BUI. But the thing about you that's so interesting is you're not. And certainly there's no slide to the start with why, the Simon Sinek. It's not 30,000 foot why. You help us understand why in terms of human biology, in terms of behavioral science, in terms of really kind of understanding the depth and really what's happening in that sausage factory. And I think, you know, when you go from, you know, brand sense to brand child to, you know, even biology, I think sometimes we do need to understand, because the world tends to oversimplify and dumb it down. And what you do is you know, it's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And you take the complex and you help us translate it. And I think that was just, to me, that was fascinating listening to you. So you never have to apologize to tell any story again. But I'm going to ask you to talk about one more thing about this special edition. And I should say, in fact, I'm going to say before I asked you to do it, that you can download this book for free. You know, and you can be the 1 millionth and 4th person. Just go to martinlindstrom.com/biology-pocketbook. There's something you said also in this, and it's not, by the way, a pocket, it's not 7 pages, it's 70 pages. You said always look in the opposite direction. What did you mean by that?
Well, it was actually not me saying that. I think it was Tara Banks saying that, because I sort of had been her mentor for some time. And I think that in the end of the day, what I've learned is that when everyone goes into panic, they tend to look in one way because that's where their attention is. But as everyone is going that way, it's the opposite way, which is much more interesting. And I'll give you an example. I kind of feel that Christmas is the theme today, which I apologize profoundly for all of you guys not celebrating it. So I'm going to call this a holiday card. But every year I actually write holiday cards myself, and I write about 700 handwritten holiday cards, and they're quite different. If any one of you out there have ever received a holiday card from me, you will know those cards you will never forget, because they are mini somatic markers. The last holiday card I sent out last year, I believe, was a wooden iPhone. So basically it was an iPhone cut out in wood, and then it was put into an original Apple pack where it had all the features of benefits this wooden phone would have. Battery life for eternity. It had a no vibration function. It was all these type of thing. And what was interesting about these holiday cards is that if people don't receive them, they actually write a card to me and ask me, where is that card? And every single person I write them to get back to me or say thank you or something like that. Now, what is it I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say that everyone else is sending out digital emails, and they are absolutely, in my opinion, crap. Either you do it or you don't do it. You can't be half pregnant. And that's what I mean about going the opposite direction, because why don't you use the letterbox? There's no one in that letterbox anymore. That's where you have the space. And that's really the categorization for everything in life. When everyone goes in panic, go the opposite way, right?
Listen, I have made it now my mission in life to receive a holiday card from Martin Lindstrom. And I will complain if I don't. And I will complain. And by the way, you're the first person I'm going to contact the people at StreamYard to tell them how brilliant it was that you actually one-upped me by thinking quickly and producing those little signs. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example. And we're going to kind of wind down. You might break a record for my longest interview, which you deserve.
Sorry.
Which you deserve. But I always play a little bit of a game with my guests, which is I come up with an esoteric quote, and then they have to kind of guess who said this.
Oh my God, I'm so horrible at this stuff here.
Marketing is common sense, but how many of us have common sense?
I would say it's me.
It's so close, though.
I would say it's me, because I've written something similar to that in my next book. I'm not sure if it's exactly that order, but something like that.
Well, I was going to tell you it was me.
Oh no, you won.
But it actually wasn't. It wasn't me. It's a story that I tell, which is when I was in my final year studying marketing at college. Yeah. The head of HR at Unilever was recruiting, and he came and he said, marketing is common sense, but how many of us have common sense? He said, I'm recruiting today for marketing, but you don't have to have studied marketing in order to be considered. He said, look at me. I have a degree in zoology and I'm the head of HR. He said something to that effect. But I thought it was just so poignant, and it's the perfect grounding for your new book, which comes out in January of 2021. So I would love to give you the platform to talk a little bit about the ministry of common sense.
Well,
and by the way, good use of the red tape, just to eliminate how to eliminate bureaucratic red tape, bad excuses, and corporate bullshit.
Yeah, I'm just helping you here to pronounce that last word.
Thank you.
Listen, I think the reality here is very simple. Companies are in a disarray. They are in a problem. And the problem they have is there's too much red tape. You have all sorts of formats of bureaucracy. I tend to call a company for an immune system. An immune system is kind of a defense mechanism for change, and people are petrified of changing. And they're petrified of changing because of the ramifications of all this stuff. And what I would also say is that there's so many rules and regulations and compliance and guidelines. And when I interview people today, I mean, 50 or 60% of the time people spend in corporations today is on politics. It's on meetings, PowerPoints, Excel spreadsheet, conference calls. I'm sure you can recognize it out there. So I decided to look into all the crap going on behind the scene. And we wrote this book, and it is incredible. I have to say, sorry for bragging. I'll just brag for 1 second. It is incredible fun, the book, I have to say. I was laughing multiple times reading it myself, because it is so ridiculous what's happening in companies today. You would think I'm lying when I'm telling you these true stories about how common sense is completely gone. So what the book is all about this corporate stuff going on out there, and then it gives a very concrete solution about how we can remove it very quickly. And it really is, for me, a way to say to the world, hey guys, we've gone too far. Let's put a line in the sand and get this house back in order, because if we don't do that, you won't be around in the future.
I love where you are in your life, in your career. Someone who has been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, had the food, as evidenced by that video, and yet someone who felt the pain, who changed, or who is continuing to change, continues to learn, also creating a different book, a book that is fun, a book that brings such a smile to your face, and a book that kind of goes back, takes a step back in order to move a giant leap forward, which is, when we go back to fundamentals of empathy, fundamentals of future-proofing, and ultimately fundamentals of saying, hey, listen, what did they say? It's not rocket science, it's just advertising. But in this case, it's not marketing, it's just common sense.
Exactly. Well said.
So, Martin, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm lucky enough that we get to continue for a few more minutes in the Zoom after show, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. This has been Martin Lindstrom. Martin, I'm going to give you the final word, and then we'll head on over.
Well, listen, I'll give you a very simple quote, because I think what we are experiencing in our world right now is profound. And I remember an author, his name is Murakami Haruki, which is a Japanese author. He actually said, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. Right now, we are in the middle of the storm. Use it, because there's always a reason for what's happening.
Beautiful words, and start writing that letter to yourself to congratulate yourself on what you did starting today. I will see you guys on Monday. I'll be back, but right now, Martin and I are going to hang out for just a few more moments. Take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend, and I will see you
everyone.
soon.
Thank you for listening.